Honorable Justice J.S. Kehar was appointed as Additional Advocate General Punjab in 1992 and was designated as Senior Advocate in 1995. His Lordship was elevated to the bench of High Court of Punjab and Haryana in 1999 and as Chief Justice of High Court of Uttarakhand in 2009 and transferred as Chief Justice High Court of Karnataka in 2010. He was elevated as Judge of Supreme Court of India on the 13th of September 2011. I now request His Lordship to kindly address the audience, please.
Mr. Justice D.S. Thakur, the Honorable Chief Justice of India, Mr. Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, Honorable former Chief Justice of India, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, the Honorable Minister for Law and Justice, Mr. Mukul Rohatgi, the Attorney General for India, Mr. Dushyant Dave has left, my brother and sister judges, past and present from the Supreme Court, my brother and sister Chief Justices and judges of High Courts, eminent members of the Bar, members of the Registry, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before I commence, just a word about Justice Venkatachalaya. The first time I saw him from a distance was when he came to Chandigarh, when he was the Chief Justice of India. And that started a revolution, as you know, the transfer revolution. That time, he was the Chief Justice of India and I was a lawyer sitting far behind, just listening to him. The second time I saw him was in Bangalore. It was the function organized by the Legal Services Authority. And then, just like today, he was the chief guest. And each one who spoke on that day described him so eminently that I was wonderstruck just looking at him. The third time, I was the Chief Justice of Karnataka, and he'd come, of Uttarakhand, and he'd come to Haridwar. And I wrote to him if I could be of any help to him, what Karnataka described as the Bhisham Pitama. One doesn't preserve letters that you get. But I got 2 letters in Uttarakhand when I was Chief Justice, which I have preserved. A most wonderful letter written by him to me, and a second letter written to me by the Dalai Lama. The only 2 letters I have preserved. And then when I went to Karnataka, I met him on 3 occasions. I went to seek his blessings when I went there. I met him a second time on a festival, and finally when I left. And I've always felt so encouraged by his blessings and his words of caution that I can never be grateful enough to him. I thank God to bring him here today. I thank him to come here today. And on behalf of everybody on the dais and all of you, a very warm welcome, sir. Man, since antiquity, has been engaged in finding ways and means to reconcile the need for order and authority in society in such a manner as would preserve individual liberty. Alexander Hamilton referred to this predicament in his famous lines: "In forming a government which is to be administered by men over men, the greatest difficulty lies thus: you must enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." It took political men many centuries to realize that a good society is one in which an individual possessed defined rights which were secure. This could be possible on a commitment of the power holders. In time, this purpose appeared to be served best by articulating the restraints society wished to place on the power holders in the form of a set of fixed and binding rules, the Constitution, limiting their exercise of political power with checks and balances. A constitution is perceived as a document which seeks to strike a balance, on the one hand, on governmental power, which has the responsibility to accomplish the needs of civil society, and on the other, to protect individual liberty. As James Madison put it, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary." A constitution is thus an instrumentality of control of the power process in any political system. The Indian Constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on November 26, 1949, and some of its provisions were brought into force on the same day. 30 years later, the Supreme Court Bar Association declared 26th November as Law Day. Thereafter, every year, this day has been celebrated as Law Day, especially by members of the legal fraternity. This year, the Supreme Court decided to celebrate Law Day as the Constitution Day. Constitution Day is an occasion on which we pay a humble tribute to the unique vision and genius of the framers of our Constitution. It is a day to reflect upon our pledge to protect, preserve, and extend the values enshrined in the Constitution. On Constitution Day, we remind ourselves of the relevance of the Constitution in achieving the enshrined objectives, and by reflecting on the strides taken by the country through its adherents. The Indian Constitution is not merely a political document. It is essentially a social document. It is based on a social philosophy. Every social philosophy, like every religion, has two main features: basic and circumstantial. The former remains constant, but the latter is subject to change. The Indian Constitution contains certain features which are so essential that they cannot be changed. The judiciary has endeavored to preserve them through the judgment rendered by a 13-judge Constitution bench in 1973, the Keshwanand Bharti case. The Constitution has progressed in the last 68 years through various phases. This evolution has come about through constitutional amendments made by the Parliament and through interpretation by the Supreme Court. The first phase of constitutional amendments witnessed the evolution of social justice. Through agrarian reform, the Parliament visualized land reforms as important in ensuring social and economic justice, and therefore incorporated Articles 39B and C in the directive principles of the state policy. It was an instrument of equitable distribution towards realizing the object of poverty alleviation. In the process, the right of property was also somewhat circumcised. The second phase of constitutional development was through the State Reorganization Act 1956, which created linguistically homogeneous states and counterbalanced the possible dogmatism. To promote the idea of cooperative federalism, the Act provided for 5 zones, 5 zonal councils for the northern, central, eastern, western, and southern zones. Each zone council consisted of a union minister appointed by the President, the chief minister of the states in the zone, 2 ministers of each state in the zone, 1 member from each union territory nominated by the President, and the advisor to the governor of Assam to be in the case of the eastern zone. In addition, the zonal council was to have certain advisors. The third phase was unprecedented in many ways. Attempts were made to pass constitutional amendments which were unprincipled, self-serving, and reprehensible. For instance, the 39th Constitution Amendment provided that the election of the Prime Minister and the Speaker could not be challenged in any court of law. Political resistance to these amendments led to the imposition of national emergency. The Supreme Court debated and declared that Parliament could not change the basic features of the Constitution. Based thereon, the 39th Constitutional Amendment was struck down. Emergency brought out the weaknesses and the strengths of the Indian Constitution. Citizens lost their constitutional, legal, and fundamental rights. Censorship was imposed on the press. Judicial independence was truncated. This led to the fourth category of amendments, which were primarily remedial in nature. Ambiguities regarding the emergency provisions of the Constitution were corrected by the 44th Constitutional Amendment. Thereby, the phrase internal disturbances was replaced by armed rebellion. Written advice of the Cabinet was made necessary for proclaiming emergency. This amendment also ensured that the right to life and personal liberty, guaranteed under Articles 21 and 22, could not be taken away by the state under any circumstance. Then came an era where defections by politicians became the order of the day. This aberration toppled many governments. To overcome this menace, the Parliament brought in the 52nd Constitutional Amendment and thereby inserted the 10th schedule in the Indian Constitution, wherein defections by members of one political party to another came to be constituted as a ground for disqualification. The 91st Constitutional Amendment gave the 10th schedule more teeth. This process of evolution by constitutional amendments has been ongoing. The Supreme Court on many occasions, in restoring the principles of limited constitutional power, has struck down many constitutional amendment acts as well as ordinary laws made by the legislature. Whether it was the 39th Constitutional Amendment, which tried to disintegrate the concept of rule of law, or certain recent constitutional amendments which had elements of interference with judicial independence, the Supreme Court has consistently tried to uphold the basic ethos of the constitutional philosophy. May I very respectfully respond to the observations of the Honorable Attorney General. This, in the view of the Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, is the Lakshman Rekha that you seek. The judiciary is mandated to shield all persons, citizens and non-citizens alike, against discrimination and abuse of state power. James Madison, referring to the judiciary, observed that the judiciary was truly the only defensive armor in the country and its constitution and the laws. If the armor were to be stripped of its onerous functions, it would mean the door is wide open for nullification, anarchy, and convulsion. Liberty, equality, and dignity of citizens have subsisted and flourished well in India due to the proactive role played by the Indian judiciary. The rule of law and constitutionalism prevails due to the sustenance and backing from an independent bar, which has been courageous in promoting the cause of the disprivileged, disadvantaged, the cause of the depressed, the cause of such sections of society as are uninformed or are unable to secure their rights due to countless barriers, and also the cause of the nation by seeking judicial intervention even in situations where one or the other high constitutional functionary have not been appointed appropriately or have acted wrongfully. A progressive civil society and pulsating media has been contributing significantly to keep the constitutional values enshrined in the Indian Constitution on track. The Constituent Assembly provided for a preservation of human rights as also political rights, which were incorporated in Part 3 of the Constitution, and social and economic rights, which were placed in Part 4 as directive principles of the state policy. The contribution of the Supreme Court towards integration of fundamental rights and directive principles in the process of constitutionalizing social and economic rights has been vital to the comprehension of directive principles, not only to effectuate the implementation of fundamental rights, but also to move towards the creation of a welfare state envisioned in the preamble of the Constitution itself. The right to live with human dignity, the right to livelihood, the right to suitable economic development, the right to health, the right to education, and the right to food are some of the landmark milestones in the judiciary, in the journey of the Supreme Court, in defining the bundle of human rights. Protection of minorities and the downtrodden is the hallmark of an evolved civilization. The Supreme Court has, in the last 50 years, contributed immensely to the development of minority rights jurisprudence. Judicial interventions have led to the fructification of Article 21A and likewise the incorporation of Article 15(5) to the Constitution. It would not be proper for me to speak of the recent past or even the present. I therefore refrain myself from doing so. All that needs to be said is this: the Constitution has stood the test of time. As a nation, we can be proud of our abiding commitment to the rule of law, free elections, fundamental rights of the people, directive principles of state policy, federalism, and decentralization of power as the bedrock of constitutional governance. I sincerely thank you all for your patience and for your time. And I thank the Chief Justice for giving me this opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, my Lord.